Chassidish Welt, they say as follows. There was once a shul a choral shul in Moscow. There was a bunch of Russian oligarchs who were there for Ne'ilah. Most of them were not religious b'chlal. Most of them weren't from. And they were bidding for Psicha V'Ne'ilah. And one of them was a Fruma guy, and he bid 2,000 ruble for Psicha V'Ne'ilah. And then the other oligarch who was not from at all steps in, and he bids 2,500 for Psicha V'Ne'ilah. And he wins. So one of his friends asks him, you're not even religious at all. Why are you bidding for Psicha V'Ne'ilah? To which he says, if I'm a businessman, and if Baron Ginsburg is bidding on something, that's the Fruma one, if Baron Ginsburg is bidding on something, then it means it's a good deal, and I want in. So in the Chassidish Welt, they say that Shabbos is the same type of thing. Pasha the Yidden have a hard time being Yitzi, hang on. Pasha the Yidden it goes much earlier. It goes much earlier. Now you know where he got it from. He used to say that a regular Pasha the Yid sometimes has a hard time figuring out and feeling exactly what's special about Shabbos. But look at the tzaddikim, look at the rebbes, look at the people who know things, and you see they care about Shabbos, so you know Shabbos is important. Now, I was thinking, you don't really have to come on to look at the tzaddikim, look at the rebbes. You don't have to know that the Bnei Yissaschar wrote a sefer about Shabbos to know that Shabbos is chashuv. The Gemara in Shabbos in Daf Yudam Beis says that it says as follows: the Gemara says if one gives a gift to his friend, you have to be meidiya him that you're giving him a gift. Shenemar, then the Gemara says, where do we know it from? Because HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Amalei HaKadosh Baruch Hu to Moshe. HaKadosh Baruch Hu told Moshe Rabbeinu, Matana Tov yesh li b'beis Genazai, v'Shabbos Shema. I have a wonderful gift in my storehouse, and Shabbos is its name, and I want to give it to you. So I think we don't have to come on to knowing that the Gracie Rebbes are busy with Shabbos, to know that Shabbos is important, and that Shabbos is, he said this, the HaKadosh Baruch Hu Alein is being made, that it's a Matana Tov yesh li b'beis Genazai. It's like the ultimate present that HaKadosh Baruch Hu has for us. I think the Kotzker once said that the pasuk says Ki asher chad yaver einei chachamim v'yisalaf devei tzadikim. So the Kotzker said, if a poor guy says that so and so is wealthy, it just means he has more money than him. Right? And if a rich guy says someone has a lot of money, so it means the guy's a very rich guy. So the Kotzker said when the pasuk says Ki asher chad HaKadosh Baruch Hu is made Ki asher chad yaver einei chachamim, it's a chacham that HaKadosh Baruch Hu says he's a chacham, and still HaKadosh Baruch Hu is made that sheichad is maver einei chachamim. So lahavdil, the same thing. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is saying that Shabbos is something worth bidding on. That Shabbos is the big deal. Now, the Gemara in Shabbos elsewhere, rather in Daf Kuf Yud Ches Amud Beis, the Gemara says, a whole bunch of milas of Shabbos. And the Gemara says just, a few, just for the flavor. Kol Meshama Shabbos Kil Chasei Afilu Ovid Avodah Zarah Kedar Enesh Moichlin Loi. Anybody who's Meshama Shabbos Kil Chasei, even if he's Ovid Avodah Zarah Kedar Enesh, they're Moichlim. It's Shabbos like will save him from whatever it is. And the Gemara says, this is a famous one. Omalei Shamur Yisrael Shabbos Rishona. If Klal Yisrael would have kept the first Shabbos properly, the Shalta ben Umah V'Lashon, they never would have been in trouble. Famously, the Gemara says, if Ilu Yisrael Meshamer Mishnei Shabbosos, then Miyadim Nengalim. So we know that Shabbos is like Shabbos is the crux. Shabbos is the centerpiece. Shabbos is what makes it all tick. Now, this idea that Shabbos is mamish the central thing for Klal Yisrael, and that Klal Yisrael is like connected and bound up in Shabbos, shel zechais in a few very interesting ways that I want to talk about. The first one is like a hashkafa type of thing, and the second one is more of a halachic nakuda. The first nakuda is as follows: there was a kol kaira that the Agudas Harabanim of America and Canada put out in 1985. The Agudas Harabanim published the kol kaira in the Paradise, and it was signed ostensibly by Moshe Feinstein, the Nasi. So the signature is Agudas Harabanim, the Arts of Bris Canada, Moshe Feinstein. Now in there it says as follows: in the pitch to be mechazik Yidden, to take Shabbos more seriously, it says as follows. It says, "V'kar Amru Chazal." The letter says, Chazal already said, "V'yoser sheYehudi shemeres haShabbos." More so than Yidden are shemer Shabbos, haShabbos shemeres haYehudi. More so than Yidden are shemer Shabbos, Shabbos is shemer Jews. U'lachein hava v'nischazik b'shmiras haShabbos, v'haShabbos tatzilanu b'chol hatzaros v'apkaim. And therefore, let's all redouble our efforts and become more careful about Shabbos, and Shabbos will protect us. Now, this is a quote that it's signed by Moshe Feinstein. Now, Moshe obviously didn't write the nusach of this paper. It was written by someone in the office, but it's signed by Moshe Feinstein. It says this quote, K'moshe Amru Kvar Amru Chazal. And it says this like very poetic quote. More than that Klal Yisrael watches Shabbos, Shabbos watches Klal Yisrael. Now, the problem is that this is a quote that it doesn't say anywhere in Chazal. Meaning there's no Chazal, there's no Medrash, there's no Gemara, there's no Chazal that says Yosir Mashram was Yisrael Shabbos. The actual makar for this quote is from Echad Ha'am, who was maybe the inventor of modern Zionism. Not a good guy. And he, in a paper that he wrote to connect Zionism and Shabbos, where he's writing that even if you're not a person who cares and you're not a frum person, still you can understand that Shabbos is what makes us. Shabbos is what binds us. Shabbos is what gives us our character. And in it, he has this very poetic line. He says, Yosir Mashi Yisrael Shamar Shabbos, Hashabbos B'Sham Ha'Reisim. So when this letter came out in the Paradise, so there was people in many different kisveyes that wrote back and said that it's not a Chazal. Other Rabbi comes from Echadam. There was a person, Rabbi Korman, Avram Korman, a tremendous guy, a little bit far out, but a tremendous guy, someone of Shmuel Ashkenazi. He lived in Mei Sharim. Some people have heard of him. He one of the biggest farm collectors of the last generation. He wrote about it. These guys wrote, and they found it comes from Echadam. It doesn't come from Shmuel Amru Chazal. Now, so others went and found that this idea, this line, that Shabbos is the Shomer for Klal Yisrael, more so than Klal Yisrael Shomer Shabbos, it really comes from many different places in Chazal. And Ramosha himself was asked about it, and he kind of said the same thing. Now, there's many places. For example, the Kuzri in Sefer HaKuzri, when in the conversation over there, the Kuzri writes that the Melech HaKuzarim tells the Yid that without Shabbos you guys wouldn't exist, because there's a lot of work to be done, and you're going to be dispersed here, there, and the other thing. You're going to be doing a million things. Without Shabbos, you wouldn't exist. Without this time of Shabbos to reconnect, to rebind to what's important, to what makes you Jews, you wouldn't exist. So, Lamashal, the Kuzri says this idea in his own way. Or, for example, the song that we sing, which comes from Rabbi Avram Even Ezra, the song that we say, the first line, Ki Yashmer Shabbos, Kal Yishmereni. If we watch Shabbos, Hashem will watch us. And now it doesn't refer to Shabbos, it refers to Hashem Yishmereni, which comes from a Rishon, from a Sephardi Rishon, from Rabbi Ibn Ezra. The same Rabbi Avram Ibn Ezra has a letter called Igeras HaShabbos, which is a letter that Shabbos wrote to him, B'chaloim. It's a fascinating letter worth talking about a different time. But in this letter that Shabbos wrote to Rabbi Ibn Ezra, it writes over there, Shemarticha b'chol yamim l'man shmartani ma'oid mimei ne'urim. It's a Rabbi Ibn Ezra, the protagonist says, I've watched you all my days so that you should watch me in turn from my Yimei Ne'urim. So again, it's like this pledge of I'll watch you and you watch me. Shabbos, meaning the Klal Yisrael watches Shabbos, or Shabbos should watch them. Or, so in Meseres Moshe in Chelik Dalet, it says that Ramosha Zenikel asked Ramosha that, this Kamosh Amru Chazal, people are being ma'ara that it doesn't say in Chazal. And Ramosha told him, I didn't write this nusach, but these exact words are not in Chazal. But the concept, that Shabbos is a shmir for Klal Yisrael, even more so than Klal Yisrael Shemer Shabbos, the concept exists in Chazal. Now, this idea that Shabbos is the central shmir for Klal Yisrael, and Kilu, it's in our own best interest to be Shemer Shabbos. Meaning, by us being Shemer Shabbos, Shabbos is Shemer us. Shtel in kind of a halachic way also, and I'll explain. The concept of Hafganos, that's really the concept of Hafganot. So it really comes from a Gemara. There's a Gemara in Rosh Hashanah and Tainus, two places, that brings down a story of Pamachas. The Gemara says, Gazra Malchus HaRasha Gzeira. The guy who made a Gzeira, Shalei Yisasku B'Torah V'Shalei Yimeilu B'neiim V'Sheichalu Shabbosos. It doesn't say what Kufa this was exactly, who this government was, but it says there was a time when the government made a Gzeira on Klal Yisrael that they shouldn't keep Shabbos, they shouldn't be mal their children. Shalei Yisasku B'Torah. So Holchu, it says, V'natlu Eitza Mi Matronisa Achas. The Chazal went and consulted with a woman of high society, a woman who understood how the government works, and they asked her. So Amr Lahem, she told them, Bayu v'hifkinu. The word hafgana comes from that Gemara. She says, Bayu v'hifkinu. Come make a hafgana. That's what she told them. Come make a protest. Come make some civil disobedience by the government. So Balayla, after a day of civil disobedience, Balayla, when they were granted a meeting, Amru, they said, Ishamayim le'achicham anachnu. By heaven, are we not your brothers? Why are you treating us different than all of the nations? You're making, hard gzeris that we can't deal with on us. And therefore the government do bitlam. That's the Gemara. It's two places in Rosh Hashanah and in Tainus. The Gemara says, and that's where the idea of tzu v'hifkinu, go make a hafgana, comes from. Now, how to interpret that, and so it's meaning, when is that tool supposed to be used and to what level, is something that surprisingly many poskim talk about. how to implicate, how to use, when to apply the concept of tzuva ifkinu is something that's discussed, at some length in Paiskim. For example, in the early days of the state, in 1950, there was a group of young men that was called, they called themselves the Brit HaKanaim. I don't know how you touch that. Brit HaKanaim, they called themselves. Amongst them was actually some very famous names who later went on to be very prominent people. For example, Shlomo Lawrence, the later Chaver Knesset, and then, he was one of the Brit HaKanaim. But Mordechai Eliyahu, later the chief rabbi of Israel for the Sfardim, one of the chief rabbis, was part of the Brit HaKanaim. So it was a group that was comprised of some real people with real kaiches. And what they would do is they would stand at different intersections where Chilul Shabbos was taking place. They would memorize the license plates of the cars that were passing by. After Shabbos, they would do a little research. They'd find out where these cars are from, and they'd go down and break a window. And if they came back next week, they'd do a little more. And eventually, the government was so frustrated by this activity that they set Isser Harel, who I think was already or eventually becomes the head of the Mossad, to go find these young men, and they would get arrested, a whole bunch of them. And some say if nothing major terrible happens to them, and they get let out. But this is all very prominent people, meaning you're talking about people who ended up being the chief rabbi in Chaver Knesset, people who ended up being the head of the Mossad. It was a small Hamish country in the beginning. And on this Brit HaKanaim, the Chazon Ish wrote some very harsh bikoret on it. The Chazon Ish was against it. The Chazon Ish writes that with this type of Leizu Haderech V'lei Be'elech Elek Yaakov Oisim Din La'atzmam. This is not the way of the Jews to make a din la'atzmam. These are young men who are full of excitement and commitment, but they weren't shayaletza b'chlal from the chachmei atayra. Ve'ein ruach chachamim neicha imenu, and the ruach chachamim is not neicha from this behavior. Lo b'masei alimut tushlat atayra hakdesha b'mitzvayseha ki darchei darchei v'chol nisi v'seha shalom. Chazon Ish writes very strongly that this is not the way. So meaning the idea of when to apply the idea of tzuva ifkinu and the idea of putting out some kanois and some hafganot to make an impression and to get a result is not one size fits all. It's not with a broad brush like any time you want. So now, one of the times where it is found to be very very acceptable and very okayed by the Gedolei Hadar was in regards to Shabbos, and where that shtel zechais, at least where it was documented, was in the 80s, I think it was in the 80s, in Petach Tikva, there was a mayor who ran for elections in maybe 1982, and his campaign was that he's going to make Petach Tikva into the next, in Tel Aviv 2.0. He won the election, and right after he won the election, he opened up a theater, cinema, and they started having cinema nights every Friday night. And the Rav of the city was Baruch Shimon Solomon, took it, very to heart, and he started organizing Hafganot every single Shabbos, and it was like a populist Hafgana that had the Haskama of Rav Shach, and the Stipler Lamashal was very, very involved in pushing it. The Ger Rebbe was behind it. Ad Kedei Kach that every Shabbos they would have a guest Rosh Shiva Mafkin, meaning 1 week of Simchas Yisrael Brady came, 1 week of Baruch Mordechai Ezrachi came, 1 week the Ger Rosh Shiva came, meaning they had like a guest Rosh Shiva to come make a Hafganah with them. And the Baruch Shimon got arrested because of it many times, and etc. Meaning, and the Gedolim were very strongly pushing these Hafganot for Shabbos. Now, Ad Kedei Kach that in some of the Paiskim there's an interesting shaila as follows. L'chayra, Eretz Yisrael is a country full of Jews, right? So every police officer is a Jew, and everybody who's going to be impacted by a protest is a Jew. So the shaila was posed to Rabbi Yashiv: if you make a protest on Shabbos against Chilul Shabbos, l'chayra, if you get out a couple hundred people to go to a street corner and make some tzuva ifkinu, what's going to happen is the police are going to come with vans and cars and their radios and etc. And the amount of Chilul Shabbos that's being generated by making the Hafganah, the Shoyl says, is far more than whatever benefit you're going to have from the Hafganah. And let's say you convince two old ladies not to do their shopping that Shabbos. They okay, turn around, go home. Not doing shopping the Shabbos. Okay, fine. You got a little bit you're talking about in a from neighborhood. All you're going to have is you're going to have hundreds of police officers come to patrol it, and you're making more Chilul Shabbos. So Rabbi Yashiv was asked this shaila. And additionally, Rabbi Yashiv was asked another nekuda, is that he said that the shaila was posed in a little more of a complicated fashion, meaning there's no chiyuv techacha on someone who's far gone. Someone who's not interested and has no interest, there's no chiyuv techacha. Va'oid, you're creating more Chilul Shabbos. And Va'oid, he says it's like, it's maybe, there's no purpose. Meaning, what do you fadin if you stam yell at people who don't care, who have no interest? Well, that's how the Shiloh was asked in like a 3-pronged way to Rabbi Yashiv. So Rabbi Yashiv in Kavitz Chuvas, Rabbi Yashiv says as follows. He says, Baram, Anolo Yadana Ma'inyin Mitzvahs Teichach Lekan. Rabbi Yashiv says, I don't understand what you're talking about. You're asking me about Teichacha in regards to this thing. Atu Mataras Hafganos to B'shvil Kiyim Mitzvahs Teichacha. You think the tachlis over here is Mishum Mitzvahs Teichacha? Etama Haloi Hadavar Pashut Kebeis B'Kuchsa. If everybody would say, listen, by the book, there's no chiyuv teichach on the situation, it is what it is. There are people who are doing averis, it is what it is. Kiyazi says, hachanuyis hatachbora v'chol batei v'chulu hoyupayilim b'shabbos k'maseyim b'chol. He says, if everybody would just say, the halacha says that I'm not mechuyev to make a macha in the situation, then there'd be no macha, and there'd also be no Shabbos. There'd be nothing left over, no remnant remaining of Shabbos, if this is how people would look at it. Amatar shel Hafganot, he says, it's to stem the tide of this magefa, of the pandemic, of uprooting Shabbos. This is all that's left in the hands of Yirei Hashem. All that's remaining, the only option that someone who cares about Shabbos, someone who realizes the value of Shabbos has left to do, is to be mafkin. And then in regards to the Lifnei Iver aspect, in regards to the fact that you're causing more Chil Shabbos to happen, he says, Ayin in the Shut Meril Diskin, where there's a tshuva with Meril Diskin says it's not a problem. Now, what the Meril Diskin that he's referring to is the Meril Diskin says that when you make 2 people mashbiah, there are Gemaras where both people brought to Bezdin have to make a shvuah. You offer them both to. He says one of them is going to lie. You can't have a case. One of them is for sure going to be lying, and still you say you do it. Why? Because the Meril Diskin says the dayan, the Bezdin, has to do what's incumbent on him to do to get the best outcome for the din, and if this guy's going to lie, then this guy's going to lie. That's not his problem. Now, Rav Moshe Sternbuch, in his tshuva, he explains this even like a little more so. Rav Moshe Sternbuch says as follows like this. He says, Be'eretz Yisrael, na'agu lahakol b'zeh. Okay, he says, I'm aware that this is not so simple, lahalacha, why exactly you're allowed to cause all this extra Chil Shabbos by being mafkin. He says, Be'eretz Yisrael na'agu lahakol b'zeh. V'ayimrim shezeu mitzvah gedolah v'chayva limches b'Shabbos. Afim him garmin Chil Shabbos. And the Welt says that it's a chayva gedolah to make machayis, even if it's going to cause more Chil Shabbos. It says, v'tzarech bir tamadavar. It needs to be explained why that is. So he says as follows, v'nira leimer b'tama heter. What I think the tama the heter is, he says, shebe'emes ein tafkid hamachayis l'mnayes chaver mechil Shabbos. Again, the purpose of the macha is not to stop Chil Shabbos from taking place. Shebekach hayamakim lefalpul mahadin. We could talk. If that would be the idea, we could handle back and forth. If there's a tachlis, if you're allowed to, etc. He says, Nervas, what it is Bekach royin, he says, Shebemukayim she'ein moichim hanegem espashet v'hoylech harei she'ein hamacha rak limnoya es hamacha al Shabbos avagam limnoya Chil Shabbos me'acherim v'chein lahadgish chaymer Shabbos. This is the point of the macha, is not only to stop Chil Shabbos from taking place, but it's to be madgish for everybody else how serious and important Shabbos is. Ve'eina anachnu anu achroyim v'arevim machal Shabbos she'yisifu chet al pesha. It's not my problem to worry about if some machal Shabbos is going to add more Chil Shabbos because of what I'm doing. Kivin shel didan moyel hamacha hazu, which is a very big chiddush adina. Since in our world, for the people who are shomer Torah mitzvahs, we're getting the message that Shabbos is so valuable and that Shabbos is central and Shabbos is worth pulling out all the stops for. And even if usually we're not running out to the street to protest, Shabbos we're out on the street protesting. That lesson that teaches people that Shabbos is so important, that lesson is worth it, he says. And this is the only way to stop pirtus in Shabbos from happening. So this idea that the idea of Shmir Shabbos is not for Shabbos, it's for Shmir for us, it's all to watch us. Even Shal Zechais in like a halachic fashion, that normal we would say it's Lifnei Iver, and we don't say Chatei b'shvil sheyizke chavercha. But what Moshe Sternbuch and Rabbi Asher and there's many other places, Rav Henkin has a truth about it, is saying is that the value of Shabbos is for us, and the protesting about the value of Shabbos is weiter for us. It has nothing to do with them. And if they do it, okay, that's like a Zaitig Lifnei Iver, you don't have to think about it. Now, I just wanted to say one more nakuda. It's a story. This is a story just about I just want to highlight the many different ways of looking at every component of Shabbos that I want to try to bring out sometimes, maybe in the future. The Divrei Chaim in Tzanz, there's a minig that by Tish, by the Suda, and every Tzanz Chassid does this at home, they cut ayim tzvibel, eggs and onions by the table, and there's a special tzanzinigin that you sing while you cut them by the table, fresh by the Shabbos Suda. Now, in Tzanz, this is a very big deal, and you could go to Abava V'Tish today, they still do it. On Shabbos Chanukah, I think they have a special song, a different song for Ayim Tzvibel. It's a very big minig in Tzanz. Now, Rabbi Yitzchak Ettinger, the Rav of Lemberg, of Lvov, was once spending a summer together with the Divrei Chaim of Tzanz. And he spent a few Shabbosim with him, observing Tish. And the first week, he went over to him and he said, what's this minig of, hacking Ayim Tzvibel by the Suda? Like, what's this about? And the Rebbe told him that, he told him, I forgot which reason he told him. He gave him a whole Kabbalistic reason for why he's, To Rabbi Yitzchak, I think he told him as follows. He told him that, there's a lot of shilas that could be tied up in how finely you chop onions and eggs. They could be teichen by eichlin, it could be very fine, and it's hard to chop them properly. And I'm afraid that if I leave it to the Mishamashim to chop up the eggs, the ayim and the tzvibel, they might not do it properly, it's going to lead to Chil Shabbos. I take care of it myself. Like that I know that it's safe and no Chil Shabbos is happening. Okay, that made sense to him. He was a good medaktik bedin, a good Rav. That made sense to him, no problem. Next week he goes back to Tish, and this week he's not going to ask already. He already knows the reason. But another chassid who's visiting, who's a heilige person, who's into a Kabbalistic person, goes and asks Rav Chaim Tzanzer, I never saw this before, what's this about? Rav Chaim Tzanzer tells him that, all Shabbos food is B'gematria 7. The mashal dag, Dalet Gimel is 7, Basar is 7, but Batzel is not 7, it's 14. And in order to bring it down to size, to cut it down to size, in a heilige way, and bring it down to the rest of Shabbos foods, I have to cut it myself. And only a Rebbe could do this, to bring it down to size. And this chassid heard it, and he was blown away. It makes a lot of sense to him. And Ritzak Ittinger is sitting there, and he's a little surprised. He heard something else last week, but okay, maybe there's more than one reason. A third week, he's there again, and this time it's a Pashat Yid, a simple chassid, asks Rav Chaim Tzanzer, what's this Ayim Tzvil about, what's this cutting about? And Rav Chaim Tzanzer tells him that onions, they're sharp, and if you cut them on Friday before Shabbos, they lose their flavor. They're not going to be fresh anymore, they're not going to be sharp. I like my onions sharp. It's Einik Shabbos, I enjoy them when they're sharp, so I cut it right by the Suda show. It should be sharp, it should be flavorful, and that's it. So Ritzak Ittinger overheard this too. He said, now he's mamish confused. I mean, it's because of this, it's the other thing. He says he went home, he thought about it a little, and he realized that it's not this, it's not this, it's not this. It's a lot of different things. And I think in a lot of Inyanei Shabbos you'll find that could be a very nuanced halachic angle to it. There could be a lot of deeper meaning Kabbalistic things. There's a lot of basic Einik Shabbos. And Mitzvah Shem will try to explore some of these ideas.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.